Aloha and good morning, everybody. On behalf of Hawaii EV Association, Blue Planet Foundation, and Drive Electric Hawaii, I'd like to welcome you to National Drive Electric Week, Hawaiian style. Drive Electric Week is, or NDO as we now call it, is an annual event. It's sponsored by Plug-in America, Sierra Club, Electric Auto Association, and EV Hybrid Noir. It's a celebration of the electric car, an important solution in our efforts to reduce emissions, increase energy efficiency, and also clean our air. My name is Noel Morin. I will be your host for today. I am president of Hawaii EV, the Hawaii chapter of Electric Auto Association. We're an all-volunteer grassroots group dedicated to accelerating our transition to sustainable transportation here in Hawaii. We are represented by a number of EV clubs across the state. There's coverage across all of our counties. Tesla Hawaii Club, which is statewide, Big Island EV, Kauai EV, Maui Nui EV, which is new. To our board members, Nanette Vinton is here today, president of Tesla Hawaii Club, Sonia Cass, president Kauai EV, Rob Weltman, who's here today, founder of Maui Nui EV. Bill Bugbee and Tam Hunt, Hawaii EV directors. And by the way, folks, if you're not speaking, if you can put yourself on mute, that'll be great. Also our club leaders and many members across the state, thank you for helping us with our mission. The mission is a big one, and it will not happen without the contributions of many dedicated organizations and leaders, some of whom you'll have the pleasure of meeting today. We're honored once again to be able to partner with Blue Planet and Drive Electric Hawaii in co-hosting this week's celebration. And I want to do a special shout out to Blue Planet Foundation's Kiani Jones. She's been instrumental in organizing and is our co-host for the events this week. We have a great lineup, a great list of topics for today. We'll talk about decarbonizing transportation, the latest in EVs. As far as the EV infrastructure goes, state fleet electrification, we'll have some updates. We'll talk about state policy and county policy. Again, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphones. Also, we'll have some time at the end for questions. So if you have any questions during the presentations, just put it in the chat. We'll take note of those and we'll address that at the end of the presentation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge our mayors and our governor for helping us celebrate. It's Drive Electric Week in Kauai, thanks to Mayor Kawakami. In Maui, thanks to Mayor Victorino. On the Big Island, thanks to Mayor Roth. On Oahu, thanks to Mayor Blangiardi. And Governor Ige has also proclaimed this week as National Drive Electric Week. So it's literally a celebration across the state for this week. I'd like to now introduce our speakers. First up is Kathleen Rooney. Kathleen is Director of Transportation Policy and Programs at Ulupono Initiative. She will be talking about our efforts to achieve clean transportation future in our state. Next up is Kiani Jones. She is Clean Mobility Director at Blue Planet Foundation. She will be sharing the latest on the EV industry. Michael Colón will be providing an update on our EV infrastructure. He's with Hawaiian Electric and is the manager of the EOT policy and program development. Robin Shishido is here with us today. He's Maui District Engineer with Hawaii Department of Transportation, and he'll be given an update on the status of the transition of our state fleet to zero-emission vehicles. Representative Nicole Lowen is chair of the Energy and Environmental Protection Committee. She'll be providing an update on our progress on the policy front, as well as insights into future policy priorities. Lastly, we'll be hearing from Heather Kimball. Heather is Hawaii County Council member. She's also vice chair of the Climate Resilience and Natural Resource Management Committee. She will be sharing efforts at the counties to enable the adoption of the laws governing EV parking and charging. With that, I will now turn this over to Kathleen.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and, sort of kind of give the big picture from the transportation space and decarbonization. Let's go to the next slide. For those of you that aren't familiar with Ulupono Initiative, we are an impact investment firm based here in Hawaii, and we make for-profit and nonprofit investments in a few different sectors. And this means we help to try to increase local food production, managing water and waste more effectively, expanding renewable energy resources, and then within clean transportation, which for our mission really means helping to reduce fuel emissions and imports. That's the sector and strategy that I lead. Next slide. And historically, as an impact investment firm, Ulupono has been very much involved in the EV space for quite some time, but they sort of realized over time is that that's not enough. And so they started looking for folks who had a little bit broader understanding of policy and planning. And that's how I came here to live in Hawaii. My background is pretty broad. I've worked at the local levels all the way up to the federal agencies, both transportation and environmental and community and housing organizations on a whole host of issues. And that actually becomes really, really useful when you're trying to develop an impact strategy around, the larger ground transportation system. And I think at the end of the day, it's really important to remember is transportation is something that gets you to do other things. It's a derived demand, right? It helps you live our lives to their fullest extent. And so how do we use transportation and policy and planning to advance those both individual goals, but also the larger community goals around how we want to, have access to opportunities, how we want to, go about our days, where we want to go and under what circumstances, where we can live and all those types of things, or where we want to live really. And so it's keeping that sort of end objective in mind, that the system itself is not the goal, but rather what the system allows us to do. Next slide. And so from the sort of larger decarbonization perspective and sustainability, generally speaking, we cannot become sustainable without tackling ground transportation. This chart here sort of shows our total GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, at the top. And you can see since the 1990s, we've had a great drop that looks wonderful. And that's, a great thing. There's been some of the other sectors have really done a great job. But what you will also notice, next slide, is that against that same sort of improvement in other industries, ground transportation is functionally sort of at the same space. And granted, this is against population growth, but it's also against improved efficiencies that are the same things that are happening in the other sectors. And so, we really do need to kind of tackle this space. And what we've been doing for the past 20 years hasn't really made the same kinds of strides like the policy interventions and maybe other types of programs out there that we've seen in other sectors. So we really do have to think about what needs to be changed sort of more broadly. Next slide. And so, how do we decarbonize that space? Well, there's really two ways at a state and local level that you can do them. There are other ways available at the federal, but usually we don't get into that too much here. And one is that, making the system as a whole more efficient and have less of an energy impact, really. And so this means, making shorter trips. It means sharing trips. It means reducing just the overall driving by sometimes moving trips to other modes like walking and biking and rolling. And that is the second is for the vehicles that sort of have to be on the road, making them as clean as possible. So, and I think what's really important to note is that we can't get to our climate goals as a community without doing both of these. There's really no way to take every vehicle off the road, just given freight and the way we live. Where everybody walks and bikes, that's probably not going to happen. You're still going to want transit vehicles on the road, and freight and business kind of vehicles. But at the same time, we can't just do a one-for-one replacement of every vehicle into a cleaner fuel set of electrification or biofuels. That also does not get us there. We really do not have the ability to build both that grid and all the renewable energy resources, even though EVs are more efficient. They really can't get us there either way. This has to happen on both sides. Next slide. And I'm going to kind of walk through the what we know about both of those. So when it comes to sort of the vehicle miles traveled, this is the statewide metric that sort of says how much everybody's driving, generally speaking. And it's been rising and it's projected to continue to rise. And there's really no large scale policy intervention or program that's out there that's really trying to tackle that or try and reduce the vehicle miles traveled. And that's going to be a real challenge. We do have some ideas, next slide, about how to reduce it. So this is actually from Transcending Oil. If you dive into the appendix, of course, it's not one of their charts, it's one that we've made. And I think what it really sort of shows is that half of it is really around road pricing and policy decisions. Another 30% is around parking policies, actually, which sometimes kind of gets more into the land use side of the transportation discussion. And then the last quarter or so is really on these things that are sort of bigger infrastructure and development changes, more density, mixed uses, streetscape design and transit, and all these types of things. And I think what's really kind of important to sort of flag here is that about 75% of our solution set is not really infrastructure or new infrastructure on the ground. It's really about changing and introducing some sort of willingness to pay into the system, or asking people is having the car the most convenient option on the face of the planet under every circumstance really the right public decision when we have these other goals around cost of living, around the climate, and all these other types of things. And let's go to the next slide. And part of the reason why these policy interventions are so powerful on the pricing side is that the way we've really chosen to address transportation issues, both here and across the country, generally speaking, is through expanding the roadways. So this means a new lane, a new road, all these types of things. And this has generally been the solution of choice. The problem with this, and this is illustrated in this cartoon, is that within 3 years, that space is filled. And, this generally matches a lot of people's experiences when it comes to new roads, is that it's been built and then eventually it's just pretty much as bad as it was beforehand. And the research across the country also sort of demonstrates this, which is that from 1993 to 2017, not one urbanized area was able to build its way out of congestion. And this didn't matter if your population was increasing or decreasing, which does happen in a few of our urban areas. And so, the solution we sort of picked isn't a great one. And in Honolulu specifically, where we have data here in Hawaii for, our congestion has actually increased by 166%. And basically what you kind of take from this is that we really do have to start expanding when we talk about the solutions to our transportation problems, what we're talking about. And really focus more on moving people and less about moving the cars themselves. Next slide. And so, now I also want to talk a little bit about what's happening on the clean fuel side. Next slide. And I think the big one is that here in particular, EVs really do have a very large role to play. We are really lucky that we have a lot of analytics here, one of which is this recent report that talks about how even compared to other places on the mainland, EVs just have a dramatic reduction in emissions and fuel consumption in a way that is, really impressive and is going to continue to get better given the change that's happening on our electric grid towards more and more renewables. And I think that that's definitely for those vehicles that we want on the road. We really do want to make sure that they are electric. Next slide. And, and just sort of to talk about how the market continues to take off is that, we're already up about 3,800 vehicles over the last year. But then also that's on top of year-over-year growth for the last few years of 25%. So although they have been a smaller part of our overall vehicles in operation, they really are continuing to grow. And I think this combined with the previous slide sort of really tells you how much we should and can lean into EVs as much as possible right now. Next slide. And I think just to sort of close it out, this is actually why when we talk about our transportation strategy, we focus on kind of the big things that can really help move the needle. And this includes going back to those parking policies, supporting policies that try and work in reducing vehicle miles traveled, continuing to build up the alternatives and the options on the ground for biking and walking. 50% of our trips in the state are about 3 miles or less. So there's a lot of pent up demand that just can't be expressed in a lot of ways in our infrastructure right now. And then this topic of today, which is really leaning in and empowering electric vehicle outreach and acceptance. so that more and more people can experience EVs and see how great they are for meeting their needs. And I know that this group in particular is going to dive into this topic a lot about all the gnarly questions about infrastructure and what's happening. And I'm really excited to hear more from everybody on the rest of the panel. But I think what I want everyone to take away with is that EVs are a very important piece of this, but we need to also be shifting a lot of our trips into more and more accessible. And I think the other thing that's sort of important to flag is that we don't need everybody to go car free tomorrow. That's not the point of this. But we do need the folks who can shift to other types of modes to shift more readily. It's kind of like you need to have 30% of the population shifting 30% of the trips, 30% of the time. This is not an all or nothing. It's having a full suite of realistic, affordable, and convenient options for all of us in all different contexts. So thank you. I think that's my last slide. I hope it is. Yeah, there we go. So, and I guess back to the next, or down to the next speaker.
Yeah, Kathleen, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate you calling attention to the importance of VMT reduction. It's not just about electrification of transportation. There's so many other solutions that we need to focus on, and that's certainly one of them.
Yeah. Thank you.
So with that, we are now going to transition over to Kiani. She's going to be sharing with us the latest as far as the EV industry is concerned. Kiani?
Sorry. Thank you, Noelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Kiani Jones. I'm the Clean Mobility Director at Blue Planet Foundation. I also do the communications for Drive Electric Hawaii, who is the co-host for this event. And I also administer the Sustainable Transportation Coalition of Hawaii, which is a U.S. Department of Energy Clean Cities Coalition. And today I'm just going to talk about the electric vehicle industry, sort of at a macro level, so we can see, what's happening and how it's going to affect Hawaii. Next slide. So let's start by taking a look at the state of EVs on a global scale. According to the International Energy Association's Global EV Outlook 2021, there were 10 million electric cars on the world's roads by the end of 2020, after a decade of exponential growth. In fact, EV registrations increased by 41% in 2020, despite a drop of 16% in overall car sales due to the pandemic. And 3 million EVs were sold globally in 2020, reflecting a 4.6% sales share. And also electric bus and truck registrations expanded in major markets. And the report highlighted 3 key factors for the resilience of EV sales, and that was supportive regulatory frameworks, additional incentives, and better choices. The number of EV models expanded and battery costs continue to fall. And not so coincidentally, these are also going to be the key factors that will continue to drive EV adoption in the years to come. And while the US lags behind China and Europe, EV sales increased nearly 200% between Q2 of 2020 and Q2 of 2021 in the US, reaching a market share of 3.6%. Next slide. So there's no doubt that the auto industry is going zero emission, and there's no turning back. Nearly every major auto manufacturer has made electric vehicle commitments, with many of them making plans or goals for 100% electrification of their lineup. So Jaguar has committed to 100% by 2025, Lincoln, Volvo, Bentley by 2030, General Motors by 2035, and Ford and Honda by 2040. Nissan has committed to do 100% by the early 2030s, with a commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050. And Hyundai and Volkswagen also have made some carbon neutrality commitments as well. And these electrification commitments are only going to accelerate. Many of these timelines may get pushed up, especially as more states adopt tougher emission standards and set targets for 100% sale of zero-emission vehicles, like California's executive order from 2020, which is targeting 100% sales by 2035, and Washington's legislation, which was passed earlier this year, targeting 2030. Next slide. So as we said previously, EV adoption is accelerating in large part thanks to better options. And this is thanks to continually improving battery technology. While the all-electric vehicles of a few years ago topped out at ranges in the hundreds of miles, EVs today can get up to almost 500 miles. So this chart on the left here is showing the average size of battery packs and resulting range in miles for all electric and plug-in hybrids. So for all electric, we're averaging about 260 miles right now, 110 on the low end, up to 490 for the Tesla Model S long range. I did double check that, and it's actually 402 is the EPA estimate. And for plug-in hybrids, 26 miles is the average, 12 on the low end, up to 65 from the Polestar 1. And improved battery technology also means that costs are dropping. So this will help provide more affordable vehicles, which is really important. In fact, the most affordable EV on the market, the Nissan Leaf, just got cheaper with a drop in their base MSRP to $27,400, which means after you factor in the federal tax credit, it's under $20,000. So we currently have about 55 plug-in EV models on the market, 26 of those being all electric, and currently there's almost 100 pure electric models set to debut by the end of 2024. Next slide. So more options is really important as well. And as we know in Hawaii, people love their pickup trucks. The Toyota Tacoma has been the #1 selling vehicle for many, many years. And now we have many electric trucks on the horizon, far more than what's pictured here. Rivian has already taken pre-orders with delivery planned in early 2022. The Ford F-150 Lightning electric truck has also taken reservations with planned delivery in the spring of 2022. And other popular trucks like the Ram 1500 and the Chevy Silverado are also being electrified. And of course, there are many more electric versions of existing trucks and brand new models in the pipeline. Next slide. So what's happening here in the United States, the Biden administration has made it clear that they're prioritizing climate issues and want to position the US as a leader in the EV market. Recent developments include the passing of the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act by the Senate, which will provide an estimated $2.5 billion in funding for Hawaii, and at least 18 million of that is specifically for building out EV infrastructure. It also provides access to $2.5 billion in grant funding for EV and alternative fuel charging, as well as access to $5 billion in grants for zero-emission school buses in high-priority areas. And the next major vote on this is actually coming up this Monday. The House will be voting to see if this passes. Biden also signed an executive order recently that sets an ambitious target for the country to make half of all new vehicles sold in 2030 zero emission. And also there's a proposal currently around increasing the federal tax credit to up to $12,500 from the current $7,500 for union-made vehicles assembled in the U.S., and also dropping the current cap that makes General Motors and Tesla ineligible for the tax credit. Next slide. So let's take a look at EVs in Hawaii. According to the Hawaii Auto Dealers Association, it's estimated that from January through June of 2021, plug-in EVs represented 7.6% market share statewide, ranking us second in the nation behind California. We're also second to California in the nation for a number of plug-in EVs registered per capita, meaning relative to population size. And last month, we saw our largest increase in EV registration to date with the addition of 665 EVs, bringing our state total to 16,216. So here at Blue Planet Foundation and Drive Electric Hawaii, we will continue to advocate for the advancement of EVs in Hawaii through outreach, education, collaboration, and more, such like events like this webinar. And if anyone in the audience hasn't yet made the switch to an EV and has questions, be sure to join us for our second webinar next weekend at the same time to learn all about EV ownership. Thank you.
Yanni, that was great. It was good to see the trends and what's what we can expect. I should add that on the trucks, the Tesla Cybertruck, if I'm not mistaken, they've got over 1 million reservations. So many of us are also anticipating that to make a big bump as far as adoption goes. I'm now going to transition us over to EV charging infrastructure. And Michael, I believe you're on, so I will transition over to you, and you can just direct me as we go through.
All right. Good morning, everybody. My name is Michael Colón. I'm the Manager of Policy and Program Development at Hawaiian Electric. Happy to be here this morning. Next slide, please. Well, so I noticed everyone's starting with these growing upward trend slides. And so Kiani did an excellent job of kind of covering what I was going to cover here. So I think I'll just use an anecdote from my personal life. My 7-year-old is a Tesla obsessive, and so whenever we're out driving around, he used to point out all the Teslas he would see. But recently, he stopped doing that, and I asked him. I said, "Oh, Mateo, why have you stopped pointing out Teslas?" He said, "Dad, there's just too many now." So I think that's a good indicator of the growing level of vehicles. Electric vehicles is very visible trend. Obviously, yeah, second highest per capita in the nation, which is fantastic. But I will add, our penetration of a little bit over 16,000 is a drop in the bucket compared to the over 1 million registered vehicles in the state. So we still have a long ways to go. But with all the momentum that's building on the federal, state, and county levels, we anticipate significant growth in the sector over the next decade. Next slide, please. So what we've been focused on at Hawaiian Electric is trying to predict and manage that growth and make sure that we can meet adequate generation supply of renewable generation as well as transmission and distribution level supply for that growth over time. So currently there's statewide, there's about 739 public charging ports available. A couple years back, we conducted a forecast study called our Critical Backbone Study, and we predicted by 2030, you would need over 46,000 private charging stations, and then around 3,600 public charging stations to support our forecasted growth by 2030 in electric vehicles. So it's a significant jump in what we have now versus what we'll need to make sure that we can support that growth, that coming growth of all those new vehicles, all those models, all the incentives coming. So it's imperative on us to be focused on infrastructure to support that growth as we transition. Next slide, please. So we currently have a small fast charging pilot. And for those of you who aren't familiar with fast charging, sometimes called DC fast charger, you may have heard of supercharging. Those are some of the terms that are used. So it's not like what you see. It's not a wall charger, and it's not like what you would see at a shopping center. These chargers are higher capacity and can really charge, depending on your battery size and your state of charge, can charge a vehicle between 15 and 30 minutes. Most recharges can occur in under an hour at maximum, and oftentimes much less. On this map, we have kind of just a graphical representation of where our current fast charging pilot locations are in our service territory. Next, if you could click it forward. Also, Tesla and Electrify America have made commitments to build out some infrastructure in the state, but it's going to be limited, and it's not going to be anywhere near enough of what we had forecasted by 2030. And primarily, the investments will occur on Oahu. Next slide, please. So a few years back, we looked at the growing trends towards electrification of transportation, and we put together what we called our strategic roadmap for electrification of transportation. And in that, we identified 10 key initiatives that we saw as potentially where the utility had a role in supporting that transition. And really, they kind of coalesced around 3 different types of programs. It's public charging, our rate development, and charging infrastructure. Public charging, as I mentioned, is our pilot where we're providing fast charging. And we're putting together right now an application to expand our public charging pilot and make it permanent in support of that transition. As far as rates go, we currently have 5 rates designated for electric vehicles, 2 of which are under review with the commission, trying to do several things at the same time with our rate designs. Support costs, mitigate costs, try and be competitive with the price of gasoline where we can, and also try to incentivize usage of renewable energy by deploying time of use rates, which are cheapest during the day when solar production is most abundant and our cost of energy production is the lowest. And then finally, our charging infrastructure programs are designed to support some of the costs of developing infrastructure without owning an end-to-end utility-owned charging network. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're looking to expand our public charging, and we'll be putting together an application later in the fall. There's several reasons to do so. You have a lot of public policy momentum behind this, as Kiani mentioned, on the federal level, but also on the local level too. State of Hawaii has committed to converting their entire fleet to electric vehicles. Same with the counties. They have committed to clean transportation over the next decade or so. And more we're seeing from folks that there are customers and drivers are seeing lack of charging infrastructure as one of the most significant barriers to adopting an electric vehicle. And in particular, fast charging is the most highest preferred type of charging because of its convenience and kind of ease of use in terms of factoring into your lifestyle. And in particular, those who do not have single-family homes, a lot of times this kind of public fast charging is one of the only resources they can leverage. Next slide, please. Another important reason for us to look at expanding, for the utility, expanding our public charging program is that the private sector has not to date really made any significant investment in the state for fast charging. Right now, Hawaiian Electric has the bulk of all fast charging in the state, and only 6 non-Hawaiian Electric DC fast chargers exist in our service territory. As I mentioned before, also, Tesla and Electrify America are planning to build, but they're limited in their investment plans right now, and they really need to see more growth before they're willing to make additional investments. So that chart on the bottom shows Hawaii is actually second to last in infrastructure build out, third-party investments in electric vehicle infrastructure. So it's significant and very important for us to be making those investments now before the need is overwhelming. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, also because of that limited third-party development of infrastructure and investment, we also think it's super important to note that Hawaiian Electric's regulatory construct for our business model allows us to be more equitable in the way we deploy our infrastructure. For the third parties who are looking to come in and make investments, non-utilities who are looking to make investments, they're going to want to focus on maximizing their revenues and mitigating their costs. What that would mean is that they would be looking to identify locations that can ensure high utilization, and therefore they'd be looking at dense urban core locations and siting where they can maximize their revenue generation to make a business case, which would pretty much ignore rural communities, harder to reach locations, and then also low to moderate income communities where electric vehicle adoption may be slower. So we view our public charging program as a real opportunity to increase equity in the deployment of the charging infrastructure and really help support overall conversion across our service territory. Next slide, please. And finally, we're looking to just jumpstart the investment in the state and jumpstart adoption too, or accelerate and boost adoption. So our proposal is going to be a subset of the total need. It's really not trying to manage any markets, but trying to help set that stage and lay groundwork for future investment from external parties as well, along with all the various incentives and federal incentives and state incentives that are in place to help push that along. So on the left, you see a larger pie. That is the total projected 2030 universe of charging need. Purple is the private universe of charging need. The pie piece there, the blue pie piece, is the public charging need, which I had mentioned kind of in the beginning. The smaller pie is just that subset of the public charging need. And then the pie piece there is what, we're proposing to do a subset of that public charging need in our program. So it's not trying to take over the market or, be a dominant force, but really just try to support and incentivize that adoption over time. And we're trying to do this sooner than later because we believe this decade is really the critical decade for achieving decarbonization goals, as well as making those transitions and really kind of locking in the benefits for future generations as well. Next slide. So part of our expansion engagement with the community, we developed a website tool that allows folks to drop pins where they would like to see charging infrastructure located. This is an actual screenshot from a week ago. We got over 1,500 responses in 3 weeks, which is pretty good considering, the amount of engagement on these things that we get. And a few things that really jumped out at me as far as some of the statistics, we also include a couple questions when people drop the pins. 84% of the respondents stated they do not have any designated parking, which is really significant. So that kind of shows, they may not have anything other than public charging available to them. And then 59% of those people, their primary mode of transportation was a personal vehicle, which means the remainder are either using public transportation or ride sharing, some other mode of transportation. Also, 39% live in a condo, 13% live in a townhouse, so only 40% live in a single family home. So again, home charging may or may not be available to the vast majority of the people who are responding. So we anticipate we're going to continue providing this tool as we go through our program and really kind of look at it as a way to garner additional feedback and information and insights into charging. So if anyone has interest in doing that, the site is still up. It's chargeuphi.com, and I'll put that in the chat link after I'm done here as well. Next slide, please. And so I'm more or less done with my discussion here, but I just wanted to remind everyone that the state legislature, graciously extended the EV charging rebate and resupported it for more funding, and we think this is exemplary of what is needed to really help support investment in charging infrastructure. So this is a non-utility program. This is something where people on their own can take advantage of, either installing new stations or retrofits, level 2 and or DC fast charging. These are the things that we'll really need to focus on to support this growth coming over the next decade and beyond. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And if there's any questions on our rebate program or on our charging program, or even the rebates, happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
Michael, thank you very much for that update. It's very informative. I also just want to highlight that on the rebate program, we invite our members, all our EV owners. They're very well versed on locations where we need these charging stations, and also situations where charging stations exist but they're non-functional. And calling attention to the availability of the rebate and tax credits to the site owners can very well translate into new charging stations for our community. So thanks again very much for that update. Really exciting to see the progress that's being made, and also what we can anticipate moving forward. I would now like to transition to Robin. We'll talk about the status of the electrification of our state fleet. And I will have Robin.
Hi, hello everybody. I'm Shishido with the State Department of Transportation Highways Division. And today I'll just talk about kind of a background of our light duty fleet, our contract that we put out there and where we're at with our state conversion. Next slide, please. So throughout our districts, Maui, Kauai, Hawaii, Oahu, we have about 350 light duty fleet. As you can see, it's a really aging fleet. And with that, our maintenance costs just keeps on going up every year. I looked at over the last 5 years and, on average, it's gone up, a little over 8%. So for us, we're really looking to, see how we can get our fleet to electric vehicles and newer and, less maintenance. Next slide. So again, just some examples of our fleet. We had vehicles upwards of 25 plus years old, even I think some was in the mid 80s. And, you can see we've just, tried to band-aid over the years, keep it going. Sorry, guys, have vehicles. Next slide, please. So again, looking at our maintenance costs, looked at fiscal year 20, and on average, it was, like $2,500 a car for maintenance. So we're spending a lot on that. In FY 2019, we started our first procurement of vehicles. So we put out a solicitation to acquire 4 electric vehicles with level 2 charging stations. We ended up getting Chevy Bolts, and they were just a little over $49,000 each. Initially, we're going to put these vehicles, some of them at our Kapolei office, but the charging infrastructure per vehicle was like about $100,000. It just needed some trenching and some work, and it's going to be really costly. So we ended up moving the vehicles to our Oahu district right near the airport, and we still ended up paying some additional infrastructure costs. So I think each car ended up being, $60,000 to $70,000 per vehicle. So, looking at going forward, in order to convert a large amount of vehicles to EVs, it would have cost us, $2.5–3 million up front. And getting back, to the maintenance piece of it, I looked at the last year and we spent $55.25 for maintenance of those 4 Chevy Bolts. So you could see transitioning to EVs and newer cars, would really reduce that cost. Next slide, please. So again, purchasing the vehicles, that would have cost us a lot of money up front. On Maui, I tried to, get vehicles as a lease. We put out 2 procurements, and the lease just, it would have come out like $800 a month over for 3 years. So looking at that, it just wasn't feasible to do that either. So with that, we looked at this kind of innovative contracting method where we could obtain vehicles and charging infrastructure as a service. I think it was talked about throughout the, other states, trying to do it, but no one had really done it. So, we're happy to be the first ones, jump in there and, get this program started. And since we have done this contract, I've been contacted by other states, just to see how it went, what kind of factors to consider. And about a month ago, City of Portland, they put out a similar contract where they were getting chargers as a service, and they also included vehicles, but their main point was getting chargers. Another thing with this contract, we had other agencies, county and state, they signed a cooperative purchasing agreement. So, they're allowed to use a contract. They weren't committed, but, it allows an opportunity to also use the contract. Next slide, please. So again, with this contract, it's open-ended, IDIQ as needed. So, we're not committed to anything. The contract can be used to obtain any kind of electric vehicle and any kind of charging infrastructure. It's 10-year contract, and, under the master contract, we would issue service addendums. And it just depends, what that situation may be, whether it's cars only, cars and chargers, maybe only chargers only. And, as the trucks come out, in the next year or two, we can also obtain trucks that way. Next slide, please. So again, with contract benefits, we don't put any money up front. We don't pay for anything until the cars are in service. So again, we don't have to, expend our capital up front. We can take advantage of bulk purchasing, if other departments, want to get together, especially at the locations where we share a building. For example, like I mentioned, our Kapolei office, I think there's, 5 other departments in there. So, that'll be our next step to get together with everybody and see how we can, share the infrastructure costs. That's where a lot of it is. Again, any tax credits, rebates, incentive programs, if the contractor can get it, it'll be passed through savings to us. And as I mentioned, the contractor, they have a fleet provider, so they're not tied to any one manufacturer. Whatever's out there is, what kind of vehicles they can obtain for us. And again, whatever vehicles come out, trucks especially, we can add on to the contract. Next slide, please. So as with the fleet electrification, being a state DOT highway division, we want to be a leader. So earlier this year, we put in our first order for 43 vehicles. We got our first one in April and just got our last one a few weeks ago. For us, we looked at, what's the easiest to convert, and it was our sedans and a lot of light duty trucks. So we, looked and see, if we really did need trucks, knowing that the EV trucks are not available yet. So we converted a lot of our trucks to smaller SUVs. And, next step is with the EVs we can get a lot of telematic data so we can, start right-sizing our fleet as well and look at the remaining vehicles. Hawaii State Energy Office also obtained a vehicle through this contract. And I know other divisions and departments are also talking with the contractor to obtain services to the contract. Next slide, please. So when we looked at, the type of EVs we want to get, we just told the contractor we want something with the 200 miles plus range and enough space, cargo space, because these vehicles would be used, by our field guys. And, when the contractor went and, talked to their fleet provider, looking at cost of vehicles and, making sure it had the battery range, making sure it had reliability because there's going to be our working cars. And, at that time, it was right as a pandemic, first a year after the pandemic, and we know there's a shortage of vehicles, and the manufacturers, a lot of them let the contractor know that, they weren't going to be providing the fleet managers of it. They were more going to be providing for the public. So a lot of these cars might have not been available for us at the time. Again, I mentioned, the charging infrastructure is a big cost. With Teslas, they make their own chargers. And when comparing Teslas and their chargers and Nissans or Chevy Bolts and, using a third-party charger, there was a big discrepancy in cost there. Other things we considered or looked at is telematics, safety, cargo space, and, maintenance and just reliability of that car. Next slide, please. So, after that, contractor came back to us and, they said the Tesla ended up being, the best value, everything considered. So here's pictures of MRE district. You can see the chargers installed right on our building. We picked our base yards because it was a site where we own, operate. Putting in the infrastructure was a lot easier. So it's kind of a low-hanging fruit for us as we move forward or get started. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, these vehicles, they're part of our working fleet. All those vehicles we obtained, our construction staff is using it to do field inspections on our construction projects. And this particular vehicle was for our lab, and they were able to outfit it with this, it's called an inertial profiler, and it collects roadway data, smoothness. And so whenever we do construction projects, paving, this vehicle will run out there, prior to paving, check the condition. After it's paved, the car will run out there again to ensure that, the contractor met our specifications. So, we were happy to see that we could, use these EVs and apply it to our everyday field applications. So that's all I had, and we'll be around for questions later. Thanks.
Robin, thank you very much for that. I before I transition over to Representative Lowen, I just wanted to state that it's very exciting to see the state fleet transition happen. Not only because it's a goal and it must happen, but also the fact that you've got new people, new individuals who are may not have been behind the wheel before, and now they're utilizing the car, they're getting the experience, they're sharing the experience with their families and friends. So it just creates this bigger halo around the electric vehicle. So pretty excited to hear that. Thanks very much for the update. With that, I'm going to now transition to Representative Lowen, and I'll stop sharing. She has her slides to share.
Okay, is this working for everybody?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for bringing this group together, and I think there's a lot of stuff to build on from the previous presenters, so thanks to everyone who already presented. There's some interesting information there for me as well. For those of you that don't know, my name's Nicole Lowen. I'm the state representative for House District 6, which includes which is a district in North Kona on Hawaii Island, includes Kailua Kona. And I also chair the House Committee on Energy and Environmental Protection. So Noel asked me to talk about, on the state policy level, what we are doing surrounding EVs. And I think one of the important questions to think about up front, and some of this has come up already, is why does the state need to get involved in this? And these are some of the reasons I think that it's important. One, we have some pretty ambitious goals relating to climate change and reducing our emissions and decarbonizing our economy. And as many who presented before me on this have pointed out, the transportation sector is a key part of that. We can't decarbonize without tackling transportation. In fact, it's a bigger part of the problem than just our power sector. We can help to facilitate quicker adoption and more widespread adoption. So even though electric vehicles are currently cost competitive on the market, there are still just barriers for people learning to do something differently, understanding new technology and being comfortable with it. There's the EV infrastructure charging question that the state can also help out with to kind of facilitate this continued adoption for new EV drivers going forward. Oops, sorry about that. Another reason is to make sure that this transition is equitable and that, EVs are an option and that people across all income levels can benefit from them. And people who live in, all different areas of different islands can benefit from the transition to clean transportation, and that it's not just for a select few who can afford it. And I threw this on here just as, because it's a question that comes up frequently from people who are kind of looking for arguments against this transition, but I think it's important to remember, EVs reduce emissions even when part of the electricity on the grid that they're charging from still comes from fossil fuels. Like as we continue that transition of the power grid, even when EVs are being charged from there, say in the evening when it's mostly running on fossil fuel, it still is a more efficient use of those fuels. So, this is just looking at what are some policies that have been in place for a while, and then I'll touch on the bills that we passed this year that are new policies. So we've had procurement preferences in statute for a while for light duty vehicles, and we updated those this year, but those have been in place. On Oahu, EVs did have some additional benefits. The HOV lane access is still standing. Some of the parking benefits expired, and those didn't get extended. The EV charging system rebates that Michael brought up, that was established by a bill that I passed in 2019, and I think was a really successful program. The funding we allocated to that was a finite amount, and that got used up, which was good. That was the goal. And so I'll talk about on the next slide the bill we passed this year to extend that and give it an ongoing source of funding. We've also had a performance contracting section of statute that allows like a financing option for EV procurement, EV infrastructure procurement, and other types of energy projects. At least on Oahu, there are some building code requirements that would, for new construction, require like EV-ready parking. It's kind of a trade-off. Like I don't know that it's mandated. I think that builders can trade it in or out for other options. So I'm not quite sure. I need to understand better actually how that building code on Oahu works. But that is something, again, that I think we'll keep working on in the future, but that is already existing kind of on Oahu. In 2019, we also passed a bill reorganizing the Hawaii State Energy Office and tasked them with supporting this clean transportation transition. And so they've been really proactive in that. And I think having a state agency in addition to DOT, who's doing a lot of other stuff, agency that really can put this front and center has been super helpful. And we also have in statute the requirement for at least one charger and one EV parking stall in I think per 100 stalls in lots in places of public accommodation. And then this is kind of hidden on my screen. I threw in at the bottom renewable energy tax credits, because I think that having those tax credits available, so that's the tax credit you could claim if you put solar on your rooftop, for example, is also helpful for facilitating EV adoption, because especially for single family homeowners, having PV on the roof is often kind of goes hand in hand with the decision to get an electric vehicle and having that make sense. Okay, so this is the kind of more exciting part. What bills do we pass this year? And the first one I'm going to talk about is House Bill 552, or Act 74. And this was the bill where we mandated the transition of state fleets for all light duty vehicles. So we established a new goal for the state that all passenger cars shall be 100% zero emissions by 2030. And then we have a 2035 date for the rest of the light duty fleet. This bill also updated the procurement preferences so that kind of realigned them and made that top choice a zero emission vehicle. And then we added those procurement preferences in for medium and heavy duty as well. So that's not a mandate for those cars, but it just means that as those options become available, the procurement incentive will be there to give them consideration. And then the mechanism basically for this state fleet transition is that for new acquisitions of vehicles beginning January 1st, 2022, so coming up in not too long, for any new acquisitions for passenger cars, like they must be zero emission vehicle. And of course, there's some options for exemptions. It's hard to pass a bill without that kind of thing in there, but it's a pretty definitive statement. And then for other light duty vehicles that aren't passenger cars, the language for that is that for any new acquisitions, they should be zero emissions as soon as practicable, but no later than 2035. And so this should facilitate like a good natural transition where we're just, when the cars are kind of past their expiration date for state fleets and the departments or agencies are looking at replacing them anyway, this will kick in and they'll, instead of buying another internal combustion engine vehicle, they'll bring on a zero emission vehicle instead. Then House Bill 1142, or Act 75. This is the extension and sustainable funding for the EV charger rebates. So what we did was shift 3 cents of the existing barrel tax. We took 2 cents, I think, away from the allocation that was going to HNEI and 1 cent from the Energy Security Special Fund. We talked to the agencies that manage those funds. They agreed they weren't using them all up. And we took those 3 cents and shifted them into a separate fund that would be specifically for the EV charger rebates to continue funding these. And it will actually be a substantial increase in the amount of funding. And so that's going to give us an opportunity to come back next year and think about how we might expand those rebates or what areas we really want to focus in on. That statute also, I don't think Michael mentioned this, so I'll mention it. I think the rebates are for publicly accessible areas. So it's like commercial areas. It can be for multi-unit dwellings and workplaces. So it's not like a rebate that's available for an individual to like put one in their parking stall. But there's a lot of flexibility in it. So I think it could be, if you are a business charging fleets, even if it's not publicly accessible in that way, I think that it still might be accessible for them because they're using it for fleet charging. And then that bill also, there was a part 2 that included these enforcement provisions. So this, I think, came up, I forget who brought this up, but our existing law that requires 1 EV charger per 100 stalls in places of public accommodation. A lot of those chargers were installed in the past. A lot of them aren't working. And this basically adds a requirement that those chargers be maintained in working order. And it also gives power to the police, kind of similar to handicap parking laws, that they can come and enforce if someone is parked in a stall designated for EV charging, if a non-EV is parked in that parking stall, or even if an EV is parked there while not actively charging, so that the charging stations remain available. So it just gives an option for enforcement. I think the way that we structured that law, the counties have to now come in and do their own work to establish those laws, but this authorizes them to do it. And I'm guessing Councilwoman Kimball will talk about that more. And then we also, just a couple other bills I wanted to mention. We passed a bill that adds a preference for when state employees are traveling for work, that they rent EVs when they're on official business if they are available. We passed SB 932. This expands some of the GEMS financing options to electric vehicles and electric vehicle infrastructure, though I think this would mainly be accessible for state agencies or maybe counties, not just anyone. And then finally, at the bottom here, I added, I can't see this because my little Zoom bar is in the way, but this is the bill that the Senate bill that just emphasizes the importance of multimodal transportation. So as Katie said when we started out this session, it's so important to remember that in the big picture, it's not just about electric vehicles. It has to be part of a bigger effort to think about the transportation system as a whole and the service it provides, which is mobility and access, as the key goals. And then talking about what comes next, what might we be looking at when we come back in for a session in 2022. One, I think, is the expansion, the additional funds available for these EV charging incentives. We also might have federal funding coming down. I'm not quite sure in what form that will be. So we have to dive into that. But some things I think that we could focus on. One is the visitor industry and rental car fleets. So we'd like to see, visitors have the option to rent an EV when they come here. But for that to be possible, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is in place for visitor needs as well, that there's chargers in hotels and they're aware of the option, and there's just like some work to be done surrounding that. And the other thing I think we could spend some time focusing on, and someone brought this up before, is the issue with multi-unit dwellings. So there is this funding available, but I think it's been really tricky with homeowners associations to try to figure out how to do that, how to manage it. And so I think there's some work to be done around how we can continue to try to help facilitating making EV charging available to people at home in condos. I mentioned earlier this requirement for new construction. So this is just about, if we're building buildings now, we're building them for the next 50 to 100 years. They should be, at the least kind of wired to be ready to accommodate EV charging. It seems like a no-brainer, but it is not a no-brainer to a lot of people. So we'll keep pushing on that. I think new construction, it's not just about EV charging, it's energy efficiency and all kinds of things, but these things do add additional costs potentially and are different than how people are used to doing things. So there is a lot of pushback sometimes from the building industry. So we need to work with them to figure that out. I put incentives for EV purchase on here. So this would be like a direct rebate or tax credit. I think that's a kind of policy I would support. I'm not sure if next year coming in, the budget's going to be strong enough to support it. We can look and see, we're not sure what's happening with some of the federal government legislation right now, but maybe there'll be some potential there. But this is something that we can think about for the future, although I'm skeptical of whether or not it will happen next year. Buses and school buses I added. So again, that could be something that we can do with the help of federal funding. There could be a really nice intersection here because we've been having a lot of problems with our public school bus system, especially if you are calling in today from Big Island or Maui. You might be aware of how difficult that's been. And the idea of funding where we could electrify school buses, but then also maybe help transition some of that school bus duty over to the DOE instead of having them contract it could be a win-win. Sorry, I wanted to do my own slides and now I'm jumping all around. There's always a push to talk about establishing broader goals for the private sector. So the goals that we established in statute last year just applied to state fleets. We could look at establishing broader goals. There are bills that will be making a comeback to ban the sale of internal combustion engine vehicles, to ban the sale of gas-powered mopeds. That's kind of on one end, we want to push people to adopt EVs. On the other end of that, you can start making purchasing new internal combustion engine vehicles unavailable. Again, that's feels a little more draconian to a lot of people. So there's probably more broader acceptance for some of the incentives in this kind of policy, but it's definitely still under discussion. And then I added here coordinating charging to maximize use of renewables and help facilitate grid stability. So this isn't necessarily something that we would pass a bill about. It might be something that the utility proposes or that the PUC opens the docket on that we'll be discussing, but that's certainly an important piece of the picture. As we bring more electric vehicles onto the grid, it does increase the demand for energy. And so there is going to be a need for the utility to figure out how to balance all that, and for us to, make sure that we are generating enough power to charge everyone's cars also. So I think that's my last slide. Just have this. And look forward to everybody's questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Lowen. There's so much going on there, and it looks like it's going to be a very exciting and busy upcoming session. So I'll give a heads up to all of our EV advocates. We're looking forward to seeing how this pans out and looking forward to supporting it. With that, I will now give Councilwoman Heather Kimball the floor, so she can provide an update on what's happening at the county level.
Thank you, Noel, and thank you to all the organizers for putting on this event today, and thank you for everybody that's tuned in on this beautiful Saturday morning to participate in this Drive Electric Week event. I just want to start by thanking all of the presenters as well. I learned some things that I didn't know today, and particularly to thank Representative Lowen, because a lot of the work that she's done over the past few years has enabled activities that I'm now engaging in at the county level, particularly with respect to that Act 75, which, as she mentioned, does a couple of things with regard to parking and making sure chargers are working. I saw some messages in the chat about how folks were frustrated about not being able to find a parking space to charge their EV, or getting there and finding that the charger wasn't working. I actually work at the Ulupono Center and have an EV, and we have 4 chargers there at the Ulupono Center, only one of which actually works. And I'm always having to wait and fight for a space. So one of the things that Act 75 enables is the county to put together an ordinance that makes sure that folks that are using our EV charging spaces are actually an EV and they're actually charging, so that when people do come to public places of accommodation, they can have access to a charger, and that charger will be working. What Act 75, or the part of the Hawaii revised statutes that it refers to, which is 291-71, what it allows is, in places of public accommodations, there's a requirement that there be 1 charger per 100 spaces. And so what I'm working on, and this is with the help of Noel and Think Big, which is Think Big Island Green, they helped draft this bill, and I want to give a shout out to them. For new parking or parking that is modified, we actually want to push beyond that 1 per 100 limit and require 2 per 50 as a start. And then we have a step up process where it's 2 per 50 by the end of 2022, 2 per 50 by 2025, 3 per 50 by 2028, and 4 per 50 by 2030. So really pushing that accommodations for electric vehicle charging. And as so many of our speakers mentioned, there's this chicken and egg thing with EV adoption, where you've got to have that charging infrastructure so that more people feel comfortable having an EV. There's also that huge equity piece, as was mentioned in the chat several times. If you're in a public housing project or a condo, oftentimes you don't have access to an EV in those types of structures. People need to feel as comfortable about being able to charge their car as they feel now about being able to go to a gas station and fuel up. in terms of getting around on the Big Island. We thought it was appropriate to push the level of EV chargers per parking space in Hawaii County, just because everything's a little bit further and you want to make sure that you can charge up your vehicle and get home. The other thing that we're doing with that is for the existing infrastructure, the existing parking lots, all we can do is enforce the level that's established by the HRS. So that's 1 per 100. And the biggest challenge for us there in getting this bill moving forward is what we're going to do with the agency that owns the most public accommodations parking in the county, which I'm sure you can all guess is the county. And so what I'm doing right now is working with the Parks and Rec Department and DPW to look at all of our facilities and how many parking spaces we have at those facilities, what sort of electrical infrastructure we have already, and see how we can make sure that we follow our own law once this bill is passed. I want to give a shout out to Riley Saito in our R&D department. He is kind of the guru about everything EV related and EV charging related, and he's been working on an implementation plan for getting more EV chargers into the county facilities, as well as transitioning our fleet. So that's another thing that I'm working on. As mentioned, the counties have committed to full conversion of the fleet by 2045. One of the things that we're looking towards is actually putting some incremental benchmarks in there to push that movement, that transition forward with the county fleet at an accelerated schedule, because we all know that 2045 is really far away and we need to start reducing emissions as quickly as possible. Also looking at, as Nicole mentioned for the state, procurement preferences within the county as part of this objective of meeting earlier benchmarks for transition of the fleet. So we'll be looking at legislation to have those preferences each time we're looking at purchasing a new vehicle. If there's an EV that's appropriate for that use, we want to make sure that that procurement is preferred. The other thing that I kind of want to circle back to, which Kathleen started with, is that it's not just the EV infrastructure and charging and adoption that is part of the overall picture of decarbonizing transportation, but is also looking at that vehicle miles traveled angle. And so I was recently selected as one of 20 elected officials across the country to be part of Smart Growth America's Champion Institute, which is looking at street design, community design to reduce vehicle miles traveled. And I'm just getting started with it. It's a wonderful program. But one of the things, and I hope Representative Lowen will help with this, that I want to look at is from the county perspective, when we are looking at community design, we are often doing our traffic studies. We do our traffic studies based on level of service, which is that whole idea of how quickly can we move vehicles around this development. But if we transition our mindset and our measurement with respect to design and traffic studies to vehicle miles traveled, how do we actually move people around and not necessarily make it as easily accessible for cars? How do we move people around in such a way that they're traveling less? That is a better measurement and will drive development in a way that actually looks at other modes of transportation overall, reducing our carbon footprint. So hoping to work with Representative Lowen about maybe shifting to a VMT model of assessment of traffic as opposed to a level of service. And the other thing that Nicole mentioned at the state level is also that building code, EV ready related efforts. So that's another thing that we're looking at, is how do we make sure as new developments, whether it's homes, condos, commercial developments, how do we ensure that they are EV ready, or just reducing overall energy usage, becoming more efficient. And we're looking at different levels of cost or square footage to make sure that, for example, if you have, this is a recent bill that Maui is working on, if you have a certain square footage, that home has to be a zero emissions home. And so really looking at how do we, as a collective picture, reduce emissions from any new development. So very excited about all of these different things going at the county. Wonderful partnerships going on with the state and other nonprofits, and look forward to introducing the EV bill, like I said, enacting Act 75. I did want to mention that this is something that we have shared with all of the other counties, and hopefully this will be a multi-county effort to introduce the legislation around the parking and the EV charging requirements. So again, thank you for all to the organizers for putting this event on today, and look forward to any questions about what we're working on. Mahalo, Noel.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. Really appreciate you and also all of our speakers today. It was very informative. I'm pretty sure I'll be scanning through the recording for highlights that we'll then be socializing with our public. We now have a segment here, a few minutes for Q&A, and I'm looking at a list that's been pasted into a Google Doc, and I'll just go through this, and we'll direct it to our speakers. So the first one is, why doesn't HECO change their public charging pricing rates to reflect time of use rates, which would essentially encourage charging during certain timeframes? So that maybe that would be a summary of this particular question. Michael?
Sure. They currently do. They have been time of use rates from the beginning. Our EVU tariff public charging rate is the cheapest time period is during the day. And then we have an evening peak, which reflects our costs for evening ramp, and then there's an overnight rate that's in between those two rates. All of our rate designs, probably since 2018, related to electric vehicles, are time of use rates. If there's any particular questions, that was part of the design of all those rates.
Great. Well, thank you. Another question here. Wondering if the shortage of cars will be discussed. I've been looking around for EVs, but most dealerships don't have any or have very limited amounts. Does anyone have any insight on this?
I'll just jump in and say I don't have a real insight or solution, but I've recently become aware of this problem, and it's definitely a priority for me to dig into it and understand why. I did a webinar with some test drives and partnered with some dealerships, and when we started asking about inventory, it was very surprising to hear that a lot of them were saying, oh, we don't have any, or we're going to get some. And I know the pandemic did affect the supply chain as well, so that was one impact. But yeah, I personally plan as part of Blue Planet Foundation and our Sustainable Transportation Coalition, which runs the EV Expert Program, to sort of dig in with the dealerships and understand, what's affecting this and how we can improve it. I do know, obviously, they also need to feel sort of confident that if they bring in the vehicles, they'll be sold. So that's another aspect is, driving up that demand and getting people interested and going out and asking the dealerships for the vehicles, getting on wait lists and things like that, so that they can see that these are investments that are worth it.
Thank you, Kiani. I see someone in the chat also mentioned that used EVs offer a benefit from a pricing standpoint, and that is certainly the case. But I will say that because we're also tracking inventory for pre-owned EVs, and we're seeing that the supply is just not there, compared to a couple of years back. So I think for me, it represents opportunity, right, for the entrepreneurs out there, for the auto dealers, for the used car dealers. There's a demand, and there's willing customers. So I think it's an opportunity. Hopefully, it resolves itself, over the next few months. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? There is a question, how do you how do present EV owners, primarily Tesla owners, feel about keeping their vehicles beyond factory warranty coverage? And I guess we can direct this to any of our EV owners on the in the event here. Does anyone want to take this on?
Yeah,
I will. Go ahead.
So, again, Robin, State DOT. So, our fleets, they're Teslas, and, we set up our first service addendum, being about 10 years. And I think the battery warranty is about 8. But, again, based on what the service provider, when they looked and talked, they felt comfortable that it would last beyond that. And on a personal standpoint, a few years ago, I did buy a Model 3 as well. And, based on information out there, I feel comfortable with having it beyond the 8 years.
Yeah, I have. So my mother-in-law drives a 2011 Nissan Leaf, and it's well beyond the warranty period. It was actually our first EV, and she's been very pleased by it. It's again low maintenance, and based on her driving needs, it's more than satisfied her her requirements. I'm looking at the chat. There's some more questions here coming in. Can you give more? Holly has. Can you give more details and specifics about battery? Well, this is quickly moving. About charger rebates, charger installation rebates. So I think if that's referring to the Hawaii Energy EV charging rebates, that's Holly, I hope you're referring to a commercial setup, right? It is available to sites that are open to the public. So workspaces, retail establishments, condos, etc. There is a website for, and maybe Kiani, if you have that readily available, you can put that in the chat. It's the website for Hawaii Energy for the rebate program. So there are details.
I'm going to put into the chat the link for basically the application. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, it has all of the requirements and details that you could want to know. So it's right there.
Okay. I'm going to look at the question, the chat again. Are there any efforts? This keeps moving. Are there any efforts for standards of controls or grid response being built into EV charger installation? I don't quite understand that question.
That might be
Michael,
a question. Oh, sorry.
So if the question is there progress towards standardization for charging the equipment itself, or?
So it sounds like a grid integration question. Being able to maybe control it through demand response or potentially vehicle to grid.
Oh, okay. In that case, so from the demand response side, charging infrastructure has been looked at as just another end use. So just like if you had any other kind of end use, because it's not looking at integration back into the grid, so there isn't any potential impact from an interconnection standpoint for backfeeding or anything. If the discussion is talking about vehicle to grid integration, where you're actually resupplying back into the grid as opposed to just locally providing energy. Was that someone clarifying it? No, not end use, but V to G. Okay, so V to G. California is actually leading on developing standards for connection integration standards for vehicles to re-inject energy back into the grid. So it'd be similar along the lines of battery or solar, but I think there's other considerations at play between the communications on board between the vehicle and then the whatever that signal sender is on the grid side. So those are the things that need to be clarified. There's these open standards communication protocols that are being worked on for developing those standards, which would then enable that functionality in the future. But right now it's still in the kind of development, testing, and discussion phase nationally.
Thank you, Michael. Team, I know there may be additional questions coming through, and what we're going to be wrapping up now. There's some additional announcements that we would like to make. For those questions that we were not able to address, we'll make our best effort to get the answers to those, and then we'll send it out to all of the registrants for this event. With that, I am going to share my screen once more and turn this over to Kiani.
Thanks, Noel. Sorry, I had myself muted again. Yeah, so we have a couple more events coming up. Just want to make you all aware, if you don't know, on Tuesday, we'll be doing a virtual trivia night, which will be really fun. You can make a team with your family or friends, or you can even join by yourself. You can play by yourself, or you can opt to be randomly assigned to a team and meet some new people. We're going to be giving away gift cards to the top 3 teams. And also, we have a giveaway going on right now where we're giving away an electric scooter for National Drive Electric Week. And if you visit our website at ndohawaii.com, you can see the rules to apply. But your presence here and your presence at any of our virtual events gains you 5 extra entries into that giveaway. And then next Saturday, we will have, as I mentioned earlier, a webinar for people who don't own an EV, who don't really know if it's going to work for them or think that it'll work for them or just have a lot of questions. Join us at that webinar. We'll be answering everything you could want to know. And also we'll be hearing from a panel of EV owners who have different living situations, different charging situations, and they'll be talking about their experiences. So hope you guys can join us. Thanks, Noel.
Yeah, please share these events with your family, friends, and connections. The other thing I'll just add too is that we're courtesy of a number of local companies. We Drive Tesla, Iona Cars, BioBeetle, and Mission Zero. For that last event next Saturday, we will be giving away test drives, not test drives, but rentals. So half-day rental for We Drive Tesla, and for the others, there'll be full-day rentals. And they will be, these are companies that are on specific islands. So we're going to be distributing those to participants from those specific islands. So it should be exciting, and also the opportunity for people to get behind the wheel. This concludes our event. To our speakers, thank you so much for sharing your mana'u and for helping us understand where we're at with the electrification of transportation. We appreciate you taking time out of your weekend, and to everyone who's participated as well. Thank you so much for celebrating Drive Electric Week with us. Hope to see you at the next couple of events. Make sure you bring your family and friends. Mahalo. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Okay, aloha. Take care. Have a great day, great weekend.
Thank you.